is the 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix. Max Verstappen starts from pole and manages to keep his lead ahead of Mercedes driver Lewis Hamilton. After the Briton attempts an undercut, Verstappen comes into the pit lane on lap 21 for a fresh new set of soft tires, and in a blink of an eye, a new record of a 1.82 second pit stop is born. One that hasn't been broken ever since. In fact, if I were to measure this very last sentence that I've just told in pit stop frequency, with this record, Max Verstappen would have his tires changed about 8 times, which is absolutely mind-blowing. Aside from that beautifully orchestrated perfection of a pit stop, the 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix was infamous for a couple of other things, but as you may have read from the title, that is not the topic of today. Instead, I'd like to walk you through a fascinating journey of Formula One's pit stop evolution, a journey that wasn't without its trials and errors, but a journey that led to this. So let's dive in, shall we? In order to understand and appreciate modern day's pit stops, we must go back in time and visit the early 1950s when races lasted about 3 hours each, partly attributed to the fact that engines were placed in the front section of the car, which essentially made it heavier and as such slower on track. Pit stops were relatively slow, with taking up to a minute to complete, with only 4 crew members allowed to work on the car, including the driver himself. One of them worked on lifting the car, another on refueling, and a third on changing 2 tires. Yes, you heard that right, only 2 of the tires were changed at the time, not the complete set. A hammer was used to remove and then secure the wheel nut, with fuel being poured straight from the gas can. Mechanics were barely separated from the actual track, where cars were racing at about 180 miles per hour, and of course no speed limit regulations were applied back then when approaching the pit crew. Just look at the crowd standing beside and behind the car wearing no safety gears at all. Different times for sure. Mercedes, however, were no strangers to innovative solutions when it came to their highly superior car in 1954. They were the first to successfully implement a fuel injection system that eventually made the car more lightweight and resulted in faster pit stops as well. Though Fangio attempted to gain advantage from an intentional pit stop in the race of Germany in 1957, the process was still quite disorganized and as such didn't go very well. Fangio managed to catch up and eventually won the race at the end, but as this incident demonstrated the risks of slow pit stops, no other teams tried to implement them strategically. A revolutionary idea to place engines in the rear end of the car put a halt to dynamic evolution of fueling technology starting from the late 50s and early 60s. For about another 2 decades or so, drivers' sessions getting abrupted by a sudden need for pitting meant that something was most definitely going against plans. Rear engines made cars more lightweight and fuel efficient, designed to last the whole race. This also reduced the average completion time of a race from 3 hours to approximately 2. So let's jump ship to the 80s when the likes of McLaren, Williams, Renault and Ferrari were dominating the sport. Teams such as Brabham were not as financially blessed as the top contenders and had to think outside the box to gain advantage. This is when a certain genius chief designer called Gordon Murray started to think of strategic ways to implement weight reduction, and he drew the following conclusion. As fuel made up a large proportion of the car's weight, reducing fuel amount to half would translate to a significant time advantage, 1 pound to 1/100th of a second to be exact. This also results in a center of gravity reduction that makes lap pace quicker each round. To this, Murray added the advantages of new tires that, of course, would be faster than those greatly degraded tires that are used throughout the whole race. Alright, that sounds excellent, but how much advantage would that offer, you'd ask? Well, about 26 seconds according to Murray's calculations. This meant that in order to gain time instead of losing it, pit stops had to be executed under 26 seconds, which was quite the challenge in 1982, since in the past 3 decades or so, the improvement of pit stop technologies was quite modest given the lack of demand. Firstly, tire changes had to be executed faster with less manual effort involved. To achieve this, Murray redesigned the wheel nut to comply with air guns and complemented this with air jacks to lift the car as quickly as possible. Increasing refueling efficiency had arguably posed the biggest challenge at the time. The ultimate goal was to pour as much fuel into the car as possible, wasting as little time as possible. Naturally, this kind of refueling mechanism created a high-pressure environment, which attracted plenty of danger during the season, Well, that was when Brabham actually managed to get far enough in the race for their cars to require a pit stop. In 1983, however, the reliability of the BMW engine increased, and Brabham designed a car that was specifically suited for mid-race stops. No other teams followed the example at the time, and that was until Brabham swooped in and claimed victory on the first race of the 1983 season. From that point on, pit stops became part of the plan, and teams were all trying to find the right time to call their driver in to maximize their overall pace. Refueling at such a speed remained to be extremely dangerous and was eventually banned at the end of the 1983 season. This led to a new era where teams were competing to find the fastest way to change a complete set of tires between 1984 and 1993, which led to a record of a 3.2 seconds spent in the pit lane in the 1993 Belgian Grand Prix. The reintroduction of refueling in 1994 spiced up the competition once again, with teams having one primary goal in mind: save time on refueling and gain the advantage that comes with it. Though the process was regulated with a fixed pumping rate of 12 liters per second using the same hose, rig, and valve, teams were trying to find other, sometimes not particularly safe ways to get around the regulations. This is when we arrive to arguably one of the most shocking and dangerous pit stops of all time, when Benetton used a hose with its filter removed, allowing the fuel to flow much faster. So fast, in fact, that the valve was unable to handle the situation, and suddenly fuel was everywhere, and it didn't take long for Jos Verstappen's car to burst into flames. This, together with other pit lane incidents, made something clear. Speed limits needed to be introduced to protect the pit crew. Yes, you heard that right. Up until 94, there were absolutely no speed limitations in the pit lane. For one, I most definitely wouldn't wish to wait for an F1 car to approach me at full speed. Refueling was part of the game till 2009, when it once again was banned and still is today. It's important to note that no matter the technical evolution, tire changes were always completed faster than the fueling process. Naturally, once the latter was taken out of the equation, teams' attention once again shifted back to the optimization of tire changes. And this is when we come full circle and arrive back to the pit stop of modern days. In order to complete the process in mere 2 seconds, teams occupied 20+1 mechanics waiting precisely at their laid out position, with 4 tire gunners operating the wheel gun, 4 members to remove the tires, and another 4 to put the new set on, 2 members at the front jack, another 2 people who are responsible for the rear jack, 2 mechanics to keep the car steady, or in case of a new front wing replacement to operate the side jacks, and another 2 crew members to adjust front wing flaps in case it is necessary for aerodynamic corrections or gains. And then there is the lollipop man, who was previously responsible for giving the green light for the driver to leave the pit lane. This role was then replaced with an electronic traffic lollipop with actual green lights, though as the device is not capable of reacting to traffic or any other unforeseen circumstances, a lollipop man stands by in case of a sudden unpredicted limitation of leaving the pit lane. One might wonder, why do teams need 2 people at the front jack, for instance, when lifting a car is clearly done by only 1 mechanic? Well, you tell me. Also, weren't we talking about pneumatic air jacks that were used in the 80s to move the car up and down? Why isn't that part of the process anymore? For one, it's been banned since the 80s, and it wouldn't help efficiency anyways, as a highly organized group of mechanics are able to complete the stop arguably faster with manual jacks. Not to mention that the weight of built-in jacks is substantial and goes completely against F1's mindset in saving as much weight as possible on their cars. Needless to say, teams are not equally efficient with their pit stops, and as such, this process has become a significant element of the competition. Some suspected that in order to speed up the release of the car from the pit lane, certain teams were operating with wheel guns that give out automatic signals when the knot is tightened, removing the human element of the process. So, in the name of safety, the FIA released a new technical directive to make pit stops slower. The regulation removes the possibility of automatic signaling by the control of sensor systems and driver reaction times. Simply put, drivers cannot react to completion under a certain limit, which is 0.15 seconds, and there must be at least 0.2 seconds before the driver leaves the lane after his car is lowered back to the ground. This adds up to a minimum of 0.35 seconds additional time spent in the pits. This decision was of course proved to be quite divisive amongst teams and fans alike, as it seemingly put an end to the constant improvement of pit stop times, and took a bit away from the competition element. Even so, pit stops are still thrilling to watch today, as they are detrimental to the outcome of each race and has the power to decide whether the driver is going to win or lose that day. I know you may still have some questions like, why did Red Bull decide to change their tires in a zero-gravity environment? Well, I wasn't there, but I'm sure it was a lot of fun and was primarily a celebration of their pit stop record of 1.82 seconds, aside from its obvious technological challenges. And get this, they have managed to complete the stop in 22 seconds, which is still about half as much as it took to complete one in the 1950s. Given that, one would get to the logical assumption that the slowest tire change of all time must have been completed in the first few decades of Formula One championships. But one would be wrong, as the slowest pit stop title of all time in F1's history belongs to Mercedes, who simply couldn't loosen the wheel nut on Bottas's car during the race of the 2021 Monegasque Grand Prix and needed to remove the front right tire with a special equipment after about 2 days the race ended. To say that the pit crew and pit stops in general are an essential part of Formula One is a huge understatement. These guys put their lives on the line, especially in the early years of Formula One. While looking at today, their performance during those race-defining 2 seconds is no short of an incredibly precisely orchestrated team performance that needs a high level of physical as well as mental effort. With that said, thank you very much for watching, and hope to see you in the next one.